Bun găsit la emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere. A sosit momentul reîntâlnirii mult așteptate cu fostul consilier al Papei Ioan Paul al II-lea la Vatican, teologul Miceal Ledwith. Am aflat informații uimitoare, unele foarte interesante, altele de-a dreptul zguduitoare și halucinante. Dar așa, după cum veți vedea imediat, deocamdată acestea se află într-o poziție speculativă. Adică, pe baza dovezilor actuale, încă nu putem ști dacă sunt 100% adevărate sau false, motiv pentru care au fost încadrate la categoria speculații. Am împărțit interviuri de 4 ore pe durata a 4 emisiuni și jumătate pentru a face câteva scurte, dar extrem de importante precizări referitoare la conținutul fiecărui episod și modul în care este recomandat să înțelegeți ideile și opiniile unui fost oficial al Vaticanului. Există o psihologie de simț comun, puternic imprimată la nivelul conștientului și subconștientului colectiv, care în această zonă geografică este focalizată cu mare intensitate asupra elementului religios. Am consultat cu atenție și prevederile legale publicate de către Consiliul Național al Audiovizualului și nu am găsit niciun paragraf sau mențiune pe baza căruia să nu difuzez ceea ce spune domnia sa. Cu toate acestea, din proprie inițiativă am introdus în textul de subtitrare, cât și pe imagini, o notă scurtă prezentată între paranteze, urmată de prescurtarea NR, adică nota redactorului. Aceasta înseamnă că acele cuvinte scrise între paranteze nu fac parte din traducere, ci ele reprezintă indicațiile mele referitoare la ideea cuprinsă în cele două rânduri ale respectivului fragment. Suplimentar am mai introdus un element de avertizare cu o bandă albastră orizontală unde apare cuvântul speculație. Aceasta înseamnă că până la data difuzării în premieră a interviului, în primăvara anului 2014, nu există suficiente probe pentru a confirma sau infirma declarațiile respective și am rugămintea să țineți cont de aceste avertismente atunci când veți viziona fiecare episod. În primul episod, domnul Miceal Ledwith ne va împărtăși detalii uimitoare ale experienței sale de vindecare prin aprofundarea la nivel practic a puterii credinței în forța vieții cu care ne putem realmente crea realitatea pe care ne-o dorim. Dar acea credință nu are nicio legătură cu credința religioasă exprimată în textele biblice. Deseori domnia sa folosește un termen metaforic și vă rog foarte mult să-l asociați ca atare în raționamentul dumneavoastră. Câmpul cuantic este doar o metaforă care se referă la faptul că puterea interioară poate fi accesată dacă manifestăm acele gânduri și idei care ne focalizează cât mai bine în prezentul infinitezimal al clipei, singurul element temporal care este cu adevărat real și care se manifestă în realitatea noastră biologică materială. Trecutul este doar o amintire, iar viitorul este doar o iluzie, dar ele sunt conceptualizate numai din punct de vedere didactic în analize și proiecte care necesită estimări. Atunci când o boală este extrem de gravă, precum ceea ce a avut domnul Ledwith și care amenință viața, domnia sa spune că este dezastruos să oferim minții noastre gânduri și idei legate de boală, expectanțe legate de un viitor improbabil sau păreri de rău legate de un trecut care s-a consumat definitiv. Nu ne putem întoarce în trecut și nici nu putem călători în viitor. Dar ceea ce putem face este de a ne crea prezentul de care avem nevoie. Domnul Ledwith face o declarație pe care o repetă de mai multe ori pe parcursul interviului și anume aceea că misiunea cea mai importantă a lui Isus a fost de a ne învăța cum să facem acest lucru. Aparent simplu și totuși extrem de dificil de realizat. Vă invit în continuare să vizionați prima parte a interviului după următorul avertisment. Afirmațiile exprimate în acest program nu aparțin producătorilor, colaboratorilor și cu atât mai puțin televiziunii române și ca atare nu pot fi atribuite acestora. Ele aparțin în exclusivitate domnului Miceal Ledwith, care are o experiență bogată pe teren religios, inclusiv în sferele cele mai înalte ale Vaticanului. Producătorul și colaboratorii, precum și instituția televiziunii române, nu susțin și nu încurajează niciun fel renunțarea la convingerile și credințele religioase proprii, care sunt o expresie majoră a libertății individuale. Toate opiniile domnului Miceal Ledwith asociate cu vindecarea unei maladii incurabile sunt însoțite de acte medicale eliberate de către o instituție medicală din străinătate, unde acesta a efectuat analize și tratamente medicale. Ideile și părerile prezentate de către invitatul emisiunii nu trebuie considerate ca fiind sfaturi medicale și nu pot fi folosite pentru diagnoza sau tratamentul unor afecțiuni. Considerăm că pentru diagnoză și tratament este necesară consultarea unor medici specialiști care pot oferi recomandări și terapii medicale autorizate. Domnul Miceal Ledwith a făcut anumite precizări, bazate pe experiența sa personală, la cererea scrisă a unui telespectator din România care suferă de o maladie asemănătoare. Televiziunea română este deschisă la orice păreri și sugestii formulate decent, care susțin sau contrazic afirmațiile domnului Miceal Ledwith. Acestea vor putea constitui subiectul unor emisiuni viitoare. Dear Miceal, welcome back to our second long interview on science and knowledge here on TVR Cluj, Romania. This time we both have much higher picture quality than ever before. Just briefly, I may say that on this moment, our last three parts interview achieved over 100,000 viewers, over 1 million minutes viewed in over 150 countries.
Oh my word.
According to YouTube statistics.
Oh my goodness, that is amazing, truly amazing.
Obviously, at least 70% of the audience is from Romania, but the rest of 30% are from the other over 150 countries.
The other more unenlightened parts of the world.
And here we meet again after the apocalyptic and end of the world year 2012, when nothing happened, not even a major earthquake, not even a major Category 5 hurricane, and even more than that, nothing happened in 2013 also. No photonic belt, no galactic center energies came to Earth, to the disappointment of a certain group of people.
Well, now that you mention it, I mean, as you know, I brought out rather recklessly a DVD called 2012-13 Alignment of Chaos.
Yes.
Because I was really horrified by the extent to which people had been exaggerating all of these things. And I wanted to lay out the evidence, like what is the evidence for all of this, or why are people getting so upset? So that's what the DVD was designed to do, to lay out all of the available evidence for the 2012 state of the Mayan calendar, and to point out that the Maya themselves never envisaged the end of the present age to coincide with that point. It was simply a new calendar. But there were signs of tremendous change of a positive kind coming in the world, yes, which hopefully that is what we will experience.
I remember that last time you asked me, what is the secret? How comes that I only need 4 hours of sleep per night?
I'm sure it is. My own experience at the moment is I need to sleep more, not less. So of course, I'm waiting anxiously if you send me this information in a soundbite someday. So it will all be obvious. But anyway, coming back to your book, I mean, I was enormously impressed, to put it mildly, with your book. And I greatly appreciate the kindness with which you were sending me episode by episode. I remember on one famous email, which in fact I looked up yesterday, you were at page 104 of the book at that point. But apart from that, I want to say how impressed I was with the quality of what you produced, the startling insights that you had managed to make there in a completely unsuspected area of human biology and psychology and human ability and power. It was a wonderful contribution. I hope it has an enormous success. And I especially deeply appreciate that you spoon-fed me with the book as it developed and progressed. Wonderful accomplishment. Congratulations, Cristian.
I thank you very much. And now I'm going to connect this short intro with a friend of mine from Timișoara who saw our interview last year and would like to know more about how the disease appeared in your case. Please describe its evolution and how started the healing process and how long it lasted.
Okay, well, our greetings to our friend from Timișoara. I hope he's going to see it very well. Transverse myelitis is the first health problem I had, as we know from our previous conversations. Transverse myelitis is a more severe form of poliomyelitis. They're both the diseases that affect the myelin sheaths around the nerves. And as you know, the nerve signals travel along the nerves, not in the wire of the nerves themselves, but in the bulbs of myelin sheath that are clasped around the nerves. In fact, in some of my reflections, I suggest, not entirely jocosely, that there must be some wonderful electronics or physics expert out there who can take the implications of this and apply it to industrial applications. For example, the signals along the wires, if we call the nerves, the axons of the nerves in our bodies, do not travel along the wire of the nerves. They jump like a kangaroo from one myelin bulb to the next around the nerves, but not on the so-called electric wire of the nerves.
Let me give you an example. The direct current circulates through the entire mass of the wire, but the alternative current is no longer circulating through the center, and as the frequency goes up, the signal is circulating only on the outer surface. So the engineers either use thicker wires, or more often they are covering the surface with silver or gold in order to decrease the resistance. Is that what you want to meant?
Give me a moment here of indulgence. I'm an old man, so I have to be tolerated a little bit at this age. But the reason I'm saying this is if you compare the speed at which the nerve signals travel through our body when the myelin sheaths are in good order, as compared to when the myelin sheaths are damaged, such as in transverse myelitis, you begin to see that, say, 200, do you use kilometers in Romania?
Yes, kilometers, yes.
But 240 kilometers per hour is the normal speed of signals within the body. Whereas when the nerve sheaths, the myelin sheaths around the nerves are damaged, the signal then has to travel along the nerve itself, speaking very crudely here. And the speed goes down to 2.4 kilometers. In other words, 1/100th of the speed at best. Most of the technology we have produced has been an imitation of what's in nature. And this is a sublime example of it. Anyway, to make a long story short, in 1992, January, I came home from a long trip to the United States, to Ireland, which is a 12,000-mile trip, or 6,000-mile trip, 12,000 miles return. And I normally went back to my office because I was horrendously busy, obviously, in that particular post as president of a university. I normally got into Dublin Airport after a 6,000-mile flight. We got in around 7 or 8 in the morning, depending on conditions. I was driven from the airport to the university, which was about, I suppose, 40 minutes away, depending on traffic. And I normally went straight to my office as if nothing had happened. But this morning I arrived back in January of 1992. I found I couldn't go to the office. And I got worse each day as the week progressed. On the Saturday night, the Minister for Education at the time in Ireland had asked me to stand in for her and deliver a speech at the Royal College of Surgeons and Physicians in Ireland's 300th anniversary, a big occasion. I went, I ate nothing, I hardly spoke to the people at the right and left side of me, and gave the speech, which everyone said was really, really very nice. I went home that night. Later at 4 in the morning, I had to be taken to hospital in an ambulance. And to make a long story short, the physician was examining me a few hours later, and I was sitting on the side of the bed, and he was listening to my heart and my lungs with a stethoscope. Then he said, "Could you stand up so I can do your back?" I tried to stand up, and I couldn't stand. And anyway, to make a long story really short, within an hour, I was totally paralyzed. I had some movement in my arms, none in my legs, no sensation in my legs. I couldn't even hold a spoon. I couldn't do anything. I could do nothing for myself, zero. It's the most humiliating experience of your entire life. You decide to walk and nothing happens. Nobody who hasn't been there knows what that is like. Anyway, I was, of course, immediately sent to MRIs and CAT scans and everything else. And eventually, the diagnosis was, after the blood tests and so forth, the myelin sheaths were cut off at between L4 and L5 in chiropractic terms in the lower back. So everything from there down was diminished, and there was a risk that it would spread upwards from the lower back and affect the lungs and the heart. And the physician said to comfort me, you know, if it spreads upwards, we can put you on a lung machine and a heart machine. And I said, suppose it goes higher, do you also have a brain machine handy here? Anyway, unfortunately, it never did. But anyway, I was in that state, as I said, of absolute humiliation and powerlessness for an entire month at its worst. Then I began to get a little better in my arms. But of course, you can imagine what it's like in a hospital bed in that condition. You know, you have about 10 different uh, tubes and wires plugged up to your body because you can't get out of bed, you can't do anything for yourself. And even to brush your teeth, someone had to come and brush my teeth for me because I couldn't hold a toothbrush. So anyway, I was getting a little better after about a month. And I noticed that the nurses didn't come into my room, say between 2 in the afternoon and around 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon. So the one thing above all that I needed to accomplish was not to scale the heights of Mount Everest, was not to win a Nobel Prize for physics, was not to do anything. It was the supreme achievement for me was to be able to brush my own teeth without someone doing it for me. So on this particular day, about 5 weeks after I got the illness, taking advantage of this couple of hours in the afternoon, I decided, even though I couldn't move my legs, I was going to get out of bed. I was going to bring all the appendages that were plugged into me with me and travel to my bathroom, which was about 2.5 feet away. So I got myself out of bed with my hands alone and got down onto the floor without too much damage. I moved all the stuff on tripods, wheeled them with me, and pulled myself by my arms across to the bathroom. And there was a little three-legged stool on the floor, and I managed to pull myself up onto the stool with my hands and arms and sit on the stool. Of course, I couldn't sit upright because I had no use in my muscles in my back. So I propped myself against the sink and I managed to brush my teeth and get myself down on the ground again, slide back across to the bed, and like climbing Mount Everest, get into the bed with just your hands alone. And lo and behold, I was about 10 minutes back in bed, safely tucked up before the first nurse came in. Even if she had come in while I was still on the floor, of course, there would have been a red alert. But anyway, I survived and managed to get back safely to bed. But I'm just telling you that story because one picture is worth 10,000 words, as Confucius used to say, of how debilitating this disease can be. There's, as far as I know, at least then, there was no cure. And basically, wherever the damage peaked, you stayed there. And where I peaked, you know, the extent of my damage was catastrophic. I wouldn't just be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I'd be on a stretcher unless I was strapped upright in a wheelchair. So that's just to illustrate how devastating this disease is. But I belonged to a school called the Ramtha School of Ancient Wisdom, and we had got teachings from Ramtha about how to heal our body, which is what attracted me so much to your work, because I saw that this is basically a work in approximately the same field as this. And I applied this teaching to my own self, even though I had very little time. As you can imagine, if you're a president of a university, you have endless visitors, most of them coming to see if you're going to live or die. Because if you're going to die, it's going to mean a lot of catastrophic roll-on effects for their own careers, because there's going to be a change of administration. And I almost suffocated from the wonderful, wonderful pots and bouquets of flowers I had in my room. And the nurses eventually took them away because they said, you're going to die of asphyxiation if this disease doesn't kill you. So anyway, we did that. So anyway, to make a long story short, again, over the next month or so, I gradually began to recover the myelin sheath. And I eventually made a complete recovery. And the essence of that, which I would extend to our friend in Timisoara, the essence of that is to never, ever, no matter how debilitated you are, or how stricken you are, or how out of it you are, never, ever see that in your mind. Never give in to that. In other words, the teachings that Ramtha gave to me were to always see yourself as absolutely well, no matter how devastatingly ill you are. And I couldn't have been more devastatingly ill. And it was doubtful whether I would even survive. But never to see that, always see yourself as radiantly healthy. In other words, do not ask to be well. Do not hope to be well. Do not implore the Lord God of your being to make you well. As long as you ask and implore and beg and beseech and above all pray for something, well then, as we know for the last 106 years, courtesy of the quantum physicists, if we're living in a quantum world, we've got to present to the deeper depths of myself, my God, what it is I wish to accomplish. Not please give it to me, but say it already is. Jesus put it best of all, because that is why he came to this world. Jesus did not come here to be our Lord and Savior and suffer and die for our sins. My God, what does that say about God who sent him here? God was so pissed off, excuse the word, is that forbidden on Romanian television? But God was so upset with what happened in the first 4,000 years, because people who believed this believed, of course, that the world began 6,008 or 9 years ago on the 23rd of September 4004 BC. But things didn't go well for the first 4,000 of the 6,000. So God decided he had to have something done about all of the insults that were offered to him in those 6,000 years. So what did he decide to do according to this tradition? He would send Jesus Christ down as his only son, totally innocent, as we know. And the destiny of Jesus was to suffer and die for our sins and endure the most cruel tortures and death imaginable. If that were true, which is to my mind the ultimate disparagement of the work of Jesus Christ, the ultimate disparagement of the work of Jesus is to say he was a suffering Savior who came here to appease the anger of a vengeful God, because that is how you would have to view God if that had occurred. It didn't occur, but that's where an awful lot of Christianity today thinks the truth lies. It didn't occur, because if God were of that kind, what parent, for example, if God is Jesus's father, what parent in this world today would send their only innocent child to suffer and die a cruel death? Why? Because they had suffered some insult from somebody and someone had to suffer for it to make up for that insult. I mean, this is a barbarous concept of God. It's nothing to do with the true God. Do I believe in God? Yes. Do I believe in the Christian caricatures of God? Absolutely not. They're an insult to the Creator. And that's an insult to the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Jesus came to teach us how to manifest in the quantum field. And with regard to my friend in Timisoara, the essence of the quantum field is whatever you present to the deeper depths of your being is what will manifest. Therefore, do not ask to be healed. Do not hope to be cured. Do not ever beg for assistance. See it as it is. 1 hour a day, preferably 2 hours a day. Never deviate from that picture, because if you do not deviate, you are now in complete harmony with the teachings of Jesus Christ, who said, whatever you want to manifest, believe it's already yours, the Gospel of St. John, and it will be so. So my friend in Timisoara, you will be healed of this. Just apply this very simple but extremely difficult teaching, because when we are suffering like that, it's really hard to entirely step out of it into a new environment. I interrupted you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful explanation. But coming back to your 4 DVDs that you had produced until now, I remember that last year you told me that you are preparing a new series. But at that time you had the second disease and now you are completely cured. Can you tell us a little more?
Yeah, well, as you rightly say, I produced this 4th DVD. I have 7 DVDs recorded. There are 3 more yet to emerge. I was very ill last year with a second illness, not transverse myelitis, but a similar illness, which nobody could diagnose. And the symptoms were very similar to transverse myelitis. But of course, I went through all the medical stuff here. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do anything with my arms. And anyway, bottom line is, to make a long story short, I recovered. But last July, I went to my local doctor here because I suffer, or did suffer, from a condition that's well known in my native country, Ireland, which is a high level of iron in the blood. Most of the majority of the population of Ireland suffer from this problem because in the Great Famine in Ireland, which occurred in the years 1845 to 47, we lost a huge percentage of our population. The population then was 8 million people. The population of Ireland today is about 4.5 to 4.9 or somewhere there. But the people who survived in Ireland 100 and whatever it is, 75 years ago, survived because they had the ability to transmute iron very efficiently into their system, which enabled them to survive the effects of famine, more or less. Now, 1 million people died in Ireland, 1 out of 8. Compare that with the major Ethiopian famine, about, I don't know, in the last 2 decades. 1 in 30 died in Ethiopia. In Ireland, 175 years ago, 1 in 8 died. 1 million people died. In a small island 300 miles long, what's that, 500 kilometers by 180, about 300 kilometers wide. Imagine 1 million people dying in 2 years in this small geographical area. Anyway, to make a long story short, the people who survived largely because they had the ability to transmute iron very efficiently. So as a result, most of the people in Ireland today who have reverted to a normal diet as opposed to the starvation diet have high levels of iron in their blood, as do I. In its 2 gene form, it's called hemochromatosis, and I'm deliberately referring this to you because of our beloved friend who has transverse myelitis. There's another disease that's closely related to this. This is not transverse myelitis, but it's very similar, and maybe, well, I shouldn't even say that. When he recovers from that, let him be on the alert for this. So anyway, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I heard about 2 people who were very, very much in my focus. There were 2 astronomers, Brian Marsden and Eric Sandage. One of them was a graduate student of Edwin Hubble, who discovered the expansion of the universe, as you probably know.
Yes.
Anyway, in November 2010, Sandage and Marsden, one of whom was in New England, up in the northeastern part of the United States, the other was 3,000 miles away in California at Caltech. They both developed this disease, which is called peripheral neuropathy.
Oh, yeah.
Which means it's a disease in the arms and the legs. It's nothing to do with the spine or the brain.
Yeah.
Both of them, this is an extremely rare disease. It occurs in 100,000 cases of, central nervous system diseases. 100,000 out of 1. So both of them got this same disease, this extremely rare disease at the same time. And both of them died within 4 days of each other in November 2010. I was following this, not because of Planet Nibiru, which they had spoken of, but some other things that they were talking about. Anyway, both of them died within 4 days of each other, and a lot of people thought it was an induced disease. You know, the old spy stories where someone has an umbrella and there's a hypodermic needle in the end of the umbrella, and they push you with the umbrella and you die because of some poison they haven't injected into you. We all know that. We are light years beyond that now. All I need is your frequency, which is known. Everyone is known. And all I need is the frequency of the disease with which I wish to implant you. I press a button and you have it. So I read all these conspiracy theories. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I'm the exact opposite. But I read all these stories, and I knew the work of Sandage and Marsden, these 2 people, in 2010. And I heard that they got this disease, and I heard they both had died. I think it was in the first 4 days after the 20th of November 2010. I think one of them died on the 19th or 20th, and the second one died on the 24th. However, all went well until January of 2011. At the end of January 2011, I came down with the exact same disease. Now, remember, I said to you in 1992, now we're in 2012, so it's 20 years. I came down with transverse myelitis. Now I find, well, I didn't find because no one knew what was wrong with me. But after excruciating tests, I was diagnosed with having peripheral neuropathy, which is a different disease than Marsden and Sandage died from. But it's a disease in the arms and in the legs, nothing in the brain, nothing in the central nervous system. I had 9 MRIs to prove that it wasn't in the brain or the spine. I had 24 X-rays. This is why I glow in the dark now and don't need a flashlight when I'm bringing in wood for my fire at night. That's a joke. I'm not glowing in the dark. But I did have 24 X-rays and 9 MRIs. Anyway, last year, coming back to my story about my Irish heritage and needing to take not a blood transfusion, but a blood donation as it used to be every month. I had to take a pint of blood out. And then later, every 3 months, I had to take a pint of blood out. My doctor died, which is not a very good advertisement for the medical profession, about 3 years ago. So because I am really extremely busy, and I know that's my own creation, but I am. So as a result, when my doctor died and my regular medical appointments didn't come up, I just let it slide because I didn't have time to take care of it. But after 3 years, I decided I really should take care of this problem. So I went to my local doctor. And I brought all my medical records, which I'm used to doing. And I said, I don't have transverse myelitis, which I don't have hemochromatosis, which is when I am in possession of 2 genes that create this excessive iron in the body. I had 1 gene. And my sister and my brother have also 1 gene, which means we're carriers of this problem. But we're not actually having the disease. But our blood is still high in iron. So I was giving, as I said, a pint of blood per month, and then it's every 3 months. Anyway, after 3 years of not going near any doctor, I went to my local doctor here, and I said I need to have a blood test and a general test of how I'm doing. And the blood test was taken. But in the meantime, the doctor said to me, do you have any previous history? Of course, now here in the United States with Obamacare looming, previous history is a big thing. So I said, yes, I do have a previous history, a very severe one, in fact. Number 1, in 1992, I had transverse myelitis. And 2 years and a half ago, I had peripheral neuropathy, which was a disease of the myelin sheaths in my arms and legs. And there was a lady doctor. That's irrelevant. Forget that. But the doctor said to me, you had a disease of the myelin sheaths whereby the myelin sheaths were deteriorated in your arms and legs, and you couldn't walk, you couldn't move, you couldn't hold a teaspoon. I said, yes, I did have that. She said, the doctor said, no, you didn't. Because you can't recover from that. That's multiple sclerosis. Well, I was a busy man. I didn't really have time to get into an agreement. And of course, I'm not a medical person, so I'm not qualified. Well, I said, you know what? I brought my file. Here's 9 MRIs and 24 X-rays. Here are the results to prove I did have it. She said, but you can't recover from that. Well, I said, I'm not interested in getting into debate about whether I can, whether or not. I'm here today, and here's the proof that I did have it. So I have recovered from it. So let's get on with the business. And the doctor got on with the business and took my blood and analyzed it for my primary reason for coming, which was to assess the level of iron in my blood. The results came back a week later. No problem with the level of irons in the blood. Everything is normal. So I did have peripheral neuropathy, which is incurable. And I did have transverse myelitis, which is a similar condition, but not in the spine or the brain. Whatever number, 1992 years, I mean. And I did have the peripheral neuropathy in my arms and my legs, but as you can see, I can move both of them now. I couldn't move either of them 2.5 years ago. This is an incurable condition, apparently. But obviously, there's something wrong with the diagnosis, because it's been diagnosed ad infinitum that I did have it. And I have the documents or the x-rays and the MRIs to prove it. But I have also something else to prove. I am now recovered. So what's that say? Something wonderful. Would you do me the inestimable favor of repeating for me how I ever got off on this sidetrack? To my friend who has the transverse myelitis, how do you pronounce that town again?
Timișoara.
Timișoara. Excuse my Romanian. It needs brushing up. To my friend in Timișoara, you're going to be fine, my friend. Just don't believe what your senses tell you and go into a different plane. You'll be fine. I've proved it twice now.
This is great. This is really impressive. And you are a living model for all our viewers who fails hopelessly and just accept their so-called destiny. I never agreed with the fact that I must obey a destiny whatsoever. But let me tell you some personal observation too. When sometimes I talk with people and told them, oh, I had this discopathy or rhinitis, they immediately stop me saying, wait a minute, what do you mean had this? You must still have this. You cannot speak on the past tense.
Excellent.
This illness is not going away. So when I'm using past tense, saying I had this, they are surprised. How could that be?
So that's a really, really profound point that you're focused on. As I said earlier in our interviews, the way to emerge from having a major, especially an incurable disease, is not to say I have it, but to say it's healed. And above all, not to ask or beg or beseech or implore, or above all else, pray that you will be healed of it. That's disaster. Because in the quantum field, whatever you present to the quantum field is what you get back. So if I want to be healed, people who have emerged out of the old religious field of superstition, they now feel we're into a new field. And we're accessing the God within, as Jesus talked about incessantly. And we're going to ask the God within to heal me. Oh, my beloved God within me, heal me, heal me. I want $1,000 for this or that, my car payment. I want $500 from my mortgage payment, or I want $300 from my rent. And I, above all, want to be healed from this crippling disease. What will your God respond? Will your God respond? Yes. Every prayer is answered 100,000% of the time. The problem is that we have not realized what it is we are actually praying for. Because as Jesus put it in the quantum field, when you ask for something, you have to stop asking. You have to believe it is already yours. And it will be so. That's not his exact words, as reported in the New Testament, but it's pretty damn close. In fact, it's closer than the New Testament reportage, which says when you pray for something, believe it's already yours. Gospel of St. John. So this, what I said is what Jesus was teaching. He was not here to be sacrificing himself for our sins to appease the vengeance of a savage and unenlightened God, which is the disastrous image that most people in the world today put on God. This is not God. This is their image of God. Jesus said, believe it's already yours. So when you're asking to heal yourself, you must be in the state to which you want to attain already. Does it sound like being dishonest? Yes. Does it sound like being a liar because I'm here in the throes of this illness and I'm saying I am the absolute contrary? Does it seem like that? It does. So what does it amount to? Fake it till you make it. In other words, I will never be healed of transverse myelitis or of peripheral neuropathy while I am focusing on those two diseases and asking to be cured of them. I have to already present to the quantum field that I am healed, despite all the pain, all the suffering, all the inconvenience. I have to wipe it clean and just stay in this state that I am already healed. Not asking, begging, beseeching. While I ask, begging, beseeching, and implore, I am going to magnify more of asking, begging, beseeching, and imploring. Prayer is always answered 100 times out of 100. But we don't realize what we are praying for. This is the huge change we need to make.
Yes. Let me quote something very related to what you had just said. This is very important and amazing. In fact, in one of his video newsletters, Bruce Lipton quotes an old Indian saying of a person named Bhagavan Das, and he said the following: worrying is the prayer for something you don't want to happen.
Exactly. You know, I'm so glad you quoted that. You know, the problem with all of us in the world today, I think people are looking up, Jesus himself said this 2,000 years ago. People are looking up to be fed, and all they're getting is garbage. So people are looking up for something, for God's sake, you know, can we be delivered from this cesspool in which we are? And I think that quotation of Ram Dass is superb.
Yes. And
we cannot be delivered while we're asking for deliverance. But when I make a quantum leap, I am already healed. The universe, so to speak, the quantum field in its levels has no alternative. I repeat it a third time because people don't get this. Once I put that into the stages of the quantum field, the universe, the creation, or God, whatever, has no option other than to create this for us, and it will cascade down the levels of frequency into this plane as long as we don't lose our focus on it. If we start asking, we're doomed. If we say it is as Jesus said, we're on the verge of healing, but don't give up until it manifests.
În partea a doua a episodului de astăzi, domnul Miceal va vorbi despre istoria originilor limbii române și a poporului român, dar oarecum domnia sa este foarte entuziasmat de cercetările unui profesor britanic, deși studiile sunt încă în curs de derulare și, prin urmare, rezultatele încă nu sunt pe deplin confirmate. Totuși, trebuie să atrag atenția asupra faptului că în discursul său, domnul Ledwith confundă uneori cultura și limba grupului de oameni care s-au aflat la originile civilizației actuale în urmă cu 15.000 de ani, cu limba și cultura poporului român, a cărui apariție este de dată mult mai recentă și care este rezultatul numeroaselor amestecuri de popoare și tradiții din ultimile milenii. Ceea ce existase în urmă cu 15.000 de ani pe actualul teritoriu al României, prea văd cum ar putea să aibă vreo legătură directă cu poporul român. Cu toate acestea, studiul științific pe care domnia sa îl citează este foarte interesant și merită toată atenția. Având în vedere faptul că emisiunile se vor păstra ulterior și pe internet, am inserat în dreptul fiecărei imagini de ilustrație sursa originală de unde dumneavoastră puteți afla mai multe informații despre subiectul discutat. Pentru aceasta apăsați butonul de pauză, copiați linkul indicat și căutați pe internet. We surely return back to this issue later on, because the public must know the details of what you had just said. But for the moment, Let's go to a highly incendiary topic. When you spoke in our first interview about the origins of Romanian language and Romanian people, I believe it was in part 3, the last minutes, and I'd like to explain us what is the origins of the Romanian and Latin languages, beginning with what had been found about the past 15,000 years when the last glacial era had ended.
Yeah, as we all know, languages are grouped in families, and we have the custom to speak of the Latin family of languages. The Latin languages are obviously Italian, which descends directly from Latin, but actually, say, modern Spanish is. I was amazed because I wasn't acquainted with Spanish until I had already spent 5 or 6 years learning Latin. But I was amazed at the degree to which Spanish resembles Latin. It's closer to classical Latin than the Italian language, which descends directly from Latin, is. But then, of course, we know that in addition to Italian and Spanish, the Romanian language is quite correctly grouped as a Latin language. But as over the course of my life's work, I began to realize that this actually is not. It's not that Romanian is a Latin language, because Romanian is from where Latin came. And of course, we're inclined to think of Latin and, say, classical Greek as the really ancient languages. Actually, on the scale of antiquity, they're not. I suppose it's one more example of Western blinkers that we can see only, in what's immediately connected to ourselves. And allied to that is the thing I quoted to you before, that it is the victors who write history. So in the ancient struggle between Romania and the Romans, say up to the time of Trajan, who died in 117 AD, in all that struggle, unfortunately, the Romanians lost out. So the Romans wrote the history. So then it said that Romanian was a Latin language. No, I said to you in that 30 seconds at the end of the last interview, no, it's the other way around. Latin is a Romanian language. And if we want to take back that to its ultimate, now, as I said, we did this interview about a year ago, the end of 2012. Now, last July, 2013, I was really pleased beyond words to see the publication of a huge study that was done by Professor Mark Pagels, Pagels, at the University of Reading, just north of London. And Mark Pagels and his team, after a colossal amount of work, trying to define the roots of what's technically called the PIE, the Proto-Indo-European language. They managed to isolate the origins of that language, which lies behind all, by the way, languages on Earth, not just the modern European languages. They managed to locate the center of that where the ice sheets didn't quite come down fully, and that's in Romania and northern Bulgaria. Bulgaria is immediately to the south of your country, at least it was the last time I was there, and that is where the ice sheets didn't come down. So the ancient language, which had come from India in countless centuries prior to 15,000 BC, when the ice sheets started to retreat, the language survived there. And as the ice sheets retreated, the language spread from there, because all traces of humanity had been wiped out across northern Europe, etc. The ice sheets didn't come down much further than that. So obviously the people who lived in North Africa and that were not much affected by the Ice Age, they continued to live on in very altered circumstances. But anyway, coming back to Professor Pagels' research, he has shown by an exhaustive evaluation of the words that most of the languages in the Northern Hemisphere came from Romania, Bulgaria, and started to spread out from there. So all languages, not just Latin, came from there. And if you go into their research, for example, like even taking the most simple word, they examined, I think, 25 or 6 basic words that have survived. But even take one of the ones that you would expect to survive, like father and mother and me and you. Obviously, those are going to survive. They also found that the word for bark of a tree, survived. They also found other unlikely words to survive, like spit. But of course, if you think, why is spitting so important? Obviously, this is one of the basic things that everyone did. You know, they used bark of trees for clothing, for winding ropes, for covering of houses, etc. They obviously referred to their fathers and their mothers, and they referred to you and me. So those words are bound to survive. They all survive, right back to the source. But if you even take one example, like the word for I, which in English, obviously, it's I. In German, it's ich. In Italian, it's io. In Spanish, it's yo. And in French, it's je. So it's basically the same word. Someone asked me one time, why did so many languages develop on the face of the earth? I said, the reason is bad pronunciation. If someone pronounces the word badly, they spread farther away. They pronounce it even more badly and more badly. Before you know it, you've got a new language due to bad pronunciation of the original.
Yes,
But anyway, the bottom line is all of this came from Romania, Bulgaria.
very interesting, because 15,000 years ago there were no cultural traditions and customs. They had to be part of very small families and groups, which later on created larger groups. And as the
Correct.
ice sheet began to withdraw from the land and the forest began to expand over the older desert, semi-desert, and steppe areas, the people began to migrate towards the new uncovered territories. But this is why on the present day we have over 60 different languages in Europe.
Right, right. And, I didn't want the Romanians to get too proud of themselves. But when I said that Romanian is the origin of the Latin language, etc., it's also the origin of culture.
Yes, but what we had 2,000, 3,000 years ago is not the actual Romania and Romanian people. We call them Dacians, and their territory was named Dacia. Dutch.
I'm very familiar with the Dacian kings, and I am conscious of two great heroes in your culture in particular. And sometimes, heroes are thrown into prominence by the force of circumstances. Like your last great hero was thrown into prominence because of having to war with the Romans and war with the Greeks in the time of Alexander, 300 years before the time I'm talking about. The Dacians were cast into conflict with the Alexander the Great's empire, and later with the spread of the Roman Empire. I mean, in the time of Alexander, the Roman Empire was basically just emerging, and it was not the world power that it later became. But what I'm saying is that, your question brought another thing to my mind about the origin of language. And the first point I would make about that is, it seems strange to us today, but back that time in history, 15,000 years ago, about 12,000 BC, the majority of the world's population spoke the same language. Okay, now we have, as you say, 60 languages in Europe, quite correct. But at that time, the majority of the world's population spoke a single language.
Yes, but this is weird, because the language could not be similar to any of the actual over 60 present-day languages, and apparently the fewer people in smaller groups departing from each other should develop more languages than if they were about to form condensed groups. But you are saying that this is the opposite.
Yes, but I'm about to move on from that to draw a conclusion to it, and that is, we are inclined to think that the more spread out from each other people are, the more languages they develop. Whereas anthropologically, the facts seem to indicate that where people are most compressed together is when they start to speak different languages as a means of preserving personal identity. For example, one example that springs directly to mind is the island of Papua New Guinea. There are 800 languages on that small island, which is very densely populated. And speaking a different language is a sort of mental barrier to present as being assimilated into the whole. So it is where people are more compressed together that diversity of languages seem to arise, not when they're more spread out. But I revert back to my point. Yes, around 15,000 years ago, the entire world spoke the same language. It has obviously diverged enormously from that, and you're quite right. What we recognize as modern Romanian or modern Latin, which is, we're speaking, of course, of a couple of thousand years ago, are very different from what was there. But the point is that all language emerged from Romania and northern Bulgaria, and that the various factors that worked for that and so forth, had different influences in different places. But what I'm emphasizing is that when the Latin language came from the Balkans, it was similar to what you would recognize in Romania today, and which turned into Latin. Latin is a recent language, relatively speaking, 2,000, say 400 years in recognizable form. In a real sense, in terms of the classical languages, it's actually a newcomer on the stage. But I'm saying that at that time, 2,400 years ago, leaving aside the 15,000, that the language that migrated southeast and directly west into Rome and so forth was an offshoot of the language spoken in Romania at that time. So not alone did all the modern languages of the Northern Hemisphere come from Romania, Bulgaria, but the more recognizable forms many centuries down since the Ice Age, there's a direct connection between the Romanian of that time and the Latin language. And that's why Romanian is mistakenly called a Latin language. It should be the other way around. Spanish, Italian are Romanian languages. I'm sure that's going to be recognized very soon.
Oh, that's a shock.
But also, as I said, the culture also came. I mean, if you look back on the history of the Dacian kings, it was a highly evolved culture, and it was basically hijacked by others. So
Yes,
it's not just the language; it's the culture has also been taken over.
But this is amazing. When I was on school 40 years ago, unfortunately on the communist regime, we are not told a single bit of this. Do you have any information about the Roman emperor's Thracian Ghetto-Dacian origin? Are there any evidence of the Carpathian Danubian Pontic space as being the home of the old Europe? Because 40 years ago in the communist regime, we are not told the real history. So,
welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. Was any culture ever told the real history? The answer is no. So even though you were not told the real history, that's unfortunate, but it's not exceptional. I think it is the ancestral culture of the whole of Europe, and therefore of every place, say in the Middle Ages of our era, it's the Romania, northern Bulgaria is the ancestor of the culture that spread to dominate the world, in the last 500 years. So I'm asking all the Romanians to step forward and take a large bow.
I thank you very much. Thank you a lot for this presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. And greetings to all our friends in Romania, a country that's close to my heart. Thank you.
Afirmațiile exprimate în acest program nu aparțin producătorilor, colaboratorilor și cu atât mai puțin televiziunii române și ca atare nu pot fi atribuite acestora. Ele aparțin în exclusivitate domnului Miceal Ledwith, care are o experiență bogată pe tărâm religios, inclusiv în sferele cele mai înalte ale Vaticanului. Producătorul și colaboratorii, precum și instituția televiziunii române, nu susțin și nu încurajează în niciun fel renunțarea la convingerile și credințele religioase proprii, care sunt o expresie majoră a libertății individuale. Toate opiniile domnului Miceal Ledwith, asociate cu vindecarea unei maladii incurabile, sunt însoțite de acte medicale eliberate de către o instituție medicală din străinătate, unde acesta a efectuat analize și tratamente medicale. Ideile și părerile prezentate de către invitatul emisiunii nu trebuie considerate ca fiind sfaturi medicale și nu pot fi folosite pentru diagnoza sau tratamentul unor afecțiuni. Considerăm că pentru diagnoză și tratament este necesară consultarea unor medici specialiști care pot oferi recomandări și terapii medicale autorizate. Domnul Miceal Ledwith a făcut anumite precizări bazate pe experiența sa personală la cererea scrisă a unui telespectator din România care suferă de o maladie asemănătoare. Televiziunea română este deschisă la orice păreri și sugestii formulate decent care susțin sau contrazic afirmațiile domnului Miceal Ledwith. Acestea vor putea constitui subiectul unor emisiuni viitoare. Fiți alături de noi, data viitoare, la o nouă întâlnire cu Știință și Cunoaștere.